Well, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. Happy Passover to everybody. You know, when I was growing up in New York, about 30% of every conversation began with, "So what's new?" You know? And if you're not from New York, you might think that it's a question that people were looking for a very specific answer, like you'd have to think about, okay, I got to think about my week. What happened that's new? But really, the nuance of the question, the direction of it is really in a different place. Actually, what's new was really a conversation opener with a lot of different possible meanings. So what could it mean? It could mean, how are you? Or, what's going on? Or, so what have you been up to since we saw each other last? You know? Or, what have you been thinking about? Or, it could mean, I can't think of anything much to say, you start. You know? But I want to suggest that we can look more deeply into this phrase, what's new? And in Hebrew, of course, that's machadash. You know, machadash, that's what you'd say that in Israel. But what we do sense in that phrase is something deeper in the Jewish soul, shaped directly or maybe more indirectly by the revelation of God in Torah. What is new? Unconsciously asking, what's new? Expresses the hope for something really new, a new world, a long for presence of goodness and everything being well and happy. That's where it really comes from. In that deeper sense, the question, what's new, carries a primal human longing for resolution and for joy. And the story of Pesach is so powerful because it answers the question for Israel and the body of Messiah, the community of believers in Yeshua, and people everywhere. To the question, what's new, the answer begins to appear. So let's consider this further. Let's talk about the phrase that we conclude our Passover Seder with. And Rabbi Nathan led us in this the other night and at all of our home Seders. And what's that phrase? Lashana, you can finish it, Haba B'Yerushalayim. How do we end Seders? More than promising to go on a tour to the land of Israel just to visit, we exclaim, Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim. We shout this all together in expectation of the great return accompanied by Mashiach's appearance, or reappearance, as we understand. So, you know, Ezekiel prophesied this, and Dave's comments were so relevant to what I want to talk about. So let's talk about our Haftorah and the Valley of Dry Bones. Now, he, that is Ezekiel, wrote this in Babylon, and he was writing to the exiles, the people who'd been carried off from Israel to Babylon, and many wanted to go home. Not everybody wanted to go home, but a lot of people wanted to go home. But the Gilut, the dispersion, seemed endless to them, like it was never going to come to an end. I have a question for you. Have you ever had a bad flu, and you're laying in bed, and it's day 3, and you can't imagine ever feeling good again? Is that just me? You know what I'm talking about? You're laying there and it's like, I forgot what it feels to be normal again. And then, of course, the flu ends and you feel better and you go, oh yeah, that's right. But think of Ezekiel's situation and the situation among the people in Galut. Many of them wondered, would it ever end? And it's to that issue that Ezekiel was inspired to give us his vision of the Valley of Dry Bones. The new is coming, Israel. You will be restored. That's the message. And we will be heading home again. Restoration, bone upon bone until the skeleton's complete. Actually, a little scary if you think about it, but anyhow, but then sinews and flesh, and Israel rises. Now, years ago, I had the privilege of taking a course with a rather famous Harvard professor, Orthodox Jewish guy, John Levinson. Dr. Levinson was teaching on the Akedah, and I had the privilege of taking the class and getting to know him. And so it was because he was a guest professor at Hebrew College where I went. Now, he wrote a book called Resurrection and the Restoration of Israel, the Ultimate Victory of God, of the God of Life. It came out in 2008. Let me read the title again because it's very relevant to what we're talking about. Resurrection and the Restoration of Israel, the Ultimate Victory of the God of Life. It's a wonderful title. But he understood resurrection in a bit of an uncommon way. Generally speaking, in modern times, the resurrection at the end of the age is thought of just in kind of group terms. The resurrection of Israel in the sense of coming back to the land. And in modern times, because, this kind of a rationalism and kind of a sense that, resurrection, people coming back to life again, come on, that can't be real, But he took a very different view, and he's Orthodox, but he says, no, resurrection is the hope for humanity. It's the hope for Israel. Yes, there will be a restoration to the land. That's part of it, but it's not the whole story. Resurrection, coming back to life, again, with conscious existence and a body, a physical body, and from our perspective, a renewed physical body, but nonetheless, a physical body. That's all part of the picture. In other words, he agreed, Dr. Levinson agrees with the Pirushim, the Pharisees of old, and with Yeshua on the point. It's not just national. It's personal. It's really new. And it's coming. That is the message. Now, why is Dr. Levinson's insight important for you and me today? Because we're concerned about this, from a real personal perspective. All of us are, and as a community. Well, because today is a very special Shabbat. Now, again, I love it when our Gabbai and others who were up before and readers talk about things which are so relevant to the moment. It's like we talked on the phone, but we didn't. But this is it. So, for us as Messianic Jews, this insight about resurrection is critically important, and it's highlighted and made most real because today is a truly unique Shabbat. I'm not kidding. Let me tell you about why today is so special. Well, today is April 8th, 2023, and it's the Shabbat which is most like a particular ancient Shabbat, which we believe to be April 4th in the year 33. You see, the best evidence is because of NASA science and because of the ability to see what the sky was like in the ancient times. You can get software which you can find any date you want in antiquity, and you'll know what the stars and the planets where they were, etc. All of that has been used to deduce that we can have a pretty clear sense of when it was that Messiah was arrested and when he was executed, when he was interned in the grave on this Shabbat. This Shabbat's the closest analog we can find. Again, we'll explain more as we go along. And then, of course, his resurrection on the next day. So here's the timeline. Yeshua was crucified on Friday, April 3rd in the year 33. He lay in the grave on Shabbat, April 4th, equivalent to today. And he rose in the early morning on April 5th. Now, we Messianic Jews experience this time frame in a very special way, and quite frankly, not like anybody else, because it's not just knowing about these things, which believers in Yeshua are very interested in for all good reasons, but we're experiencing it. This is Shabbat. It is the Shabbat during Pesach. Tomorrow is a day we acknowledge as the time when Mashiach rose from the dead, according to the model of John Levinson and, of course, the teaching of Yeshua and the Pirushim too, the Pharisees. We Messianic Jews experience this time frame in a very special way, not like anyone else. We can identify with his earliest Jewish followers, Kepha, that's Peter, Miriam, Yochanan, that's John, and we do this like no one else because we share Pesach with them, Shabbat with them, and Yeshua with them. I hope you can get a handle on that. It is really great and really striking, and no one else has this unique perspective because of the insider status that we legitimately claim, although not pridefully, because this is just God's work and there's no room for any kind of arrogance or pride here. But imagine this. Imagine this. You could take a time machine. Today we can hop on a time machine and go back to Jerusalem, to the very place where they gathered on the Shabbat in the year 33. Now, knowing what you know, knowing what you know about what would occur in Jerusalem and at the tomb where Yeshua had been buried, what would you say to his gathered followers? Think about it. It's the Shabbat after his execution. And if you could speak the Hebrew, and of course this is a contrived example, but it makes a point, if you could take a time machine and get to Jerusalem and knock on the door of where they were spending Shabbat in the afternoon, what would you say to them? Well, maybe you would say something like this. You'd say, Shalom Aleichem, everybody. My name is, I'm from a very different place, long in the future, right? And you might say, I know you're scared, completely confused, disoriented, and angry. All you had hoped for seems to have evaporated. But I want to tell you, the new is coming, and your sorrow will last only a very short time. You might point to the youngest of them, Yochanan, and say, you, Yochanan, will be granted a vision of Yeshua, the Lamb of God, which tells the deeper story of Pesach. Today, in our synagogue, we will read what you received in your holy vision as a much older man. But in our time machine fantasy, that's all which could be said before we are whisked back to our sanctuary here today. Okay. What would Yochanan write? Well, we read it, and it was beautifully read by Rebecca this morning. Revelation chapter 5. The book of Revelation, by the way, let me just say parenthetically, what is the book of Revelation? The book of Revelation answers the question, what's new? What's going to happen? It's a revelation. That's the idea of even the name of the book. The book of Revelation can be viewed as a stylized prophetic retelling of the Passover story, including a sea of glass, right? You ever read that? An Exodus and the return to the promised land. Now here's what Yochanan wrote. Then I looked and heard the voice of many angels numbering thousands and thousands and thousands, and 10,000s times 10,000. They encircled the throne and the living creatures and the elders. In a loud voice, they were saying, worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and praise. Imagine the scene. Then I heard every creature in heaven and on the earth and under the earth and on the sea and all that is in them saying, to him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise and glory and honor and power forever and ever. So what's new? It's a very Jewish question. What's new? A poor Jew living in the first century embodied the ultimate meaning of return because he is the Paschal Lamb. During this week, let's celebrate the ultimate answer to the question, what's new? Peace and joy and goodness promised to Am Yisrael and to all the people of the world through Yeshua, our promised Messiah. No matter how disorienting things may look in the months ahead, and I have a feeling for a number of reasons it's going to look pretty disorienting, let's remember the earliest Messianic Jews and how the joy postponed on April 4th changed forever on April 5th. Let's covenant with one another and hold on to these truths in the days ahead. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.